Thanks everyone for joining. The team is super excited to get into the presentation. We had a lot of good questions. Apologies in advance if your question doesn't get answered, but always feel free to get in touch and one of us will be more than happy to help out. So without further ado, let's get into it. Bit of a brief summary of what we're going to be covering today. So we'll start off with who is Monochrome, what do we do, how do we get here, and then we'll move on to a bit of what is Bitcoin and why does it matter, the asset class that we all know and love. And then we'll touch on our flagship product, the Monochrome Bitcoin ETF. We'll talk about its structural advantages, its place in the market, and hopefully give a good overview for anyone that has any questions about that. We'll then have a quick section on market insights and trends, kind of what we're seeing from our side of the desk, what's going on in the ecosystem, and a little bit of price talk and what we're seeing in terms of flows with our ETF. We'll then go into our Q&As, and then finally we'll end with going over some resources that we have, where can you get in touch, and we'll go from there. So just touching on our panelists today, we've got our Chief Executive Officer, Jeff, our Chief Operating Officer, Bridget, and myself. I look after the ETF operations here. So before we get into it, I do have an important disclaimer to read. So Monochrome Asset Management is a corporate authorized representative of Vasco Trustees. Monochrome is the investment manager for the Monochrome Bitcoin ETF. And Vasco Trustees is the responsible entity and issuer of interests in IBTC. Investing in Bitcoin is volatile and high risk. In deciding whether to acquire an interest in IBTC, investors should read the product disclosure statement and target market determination at monochrome.au and consider if the investment is appropriate for their circumstances. This information is general in nature and does not take into account any person's individual objectives, financial situation, or needs. In deciding whether to acquire an interest in IBTC, before investing, investors should read the PDS and TMD, and with the assistance of a financial advisor, consider if the investment is appropriate for their circumstances. Past performance is not indicative of future performance. So we'll kick off the first section and I'll pass it to the man on the mission, Jeff.
Thank you, Grayson, and good morning, everyone. My name is Jeff Yu. I am the founder and CEO of Monochrome. Welcome to the webinar for the first ETF in Australia licensed to hold Bitcoin directly, the Monochrome Bitcoin ETF under the stock ticker IBTC. First off, I would like to express my gratitude for you all for taking the time to join us for this webinar, and to a number of you for your continued support of IBTC. So without further ado, I would like to share a brief introduction to Monochrome, and what better way than to shed some background on our group parent company, Monochrome Corporation. So Monochrome Corporation is a multi-investment crypto asset financial services company based in Australia with an office in Sydney and Brisbane. We specialize in infrastructure projects within the crypto asset landscape with a strong focus on regulated services, which includes asset management, such as exchange-traded funds, ETFs, retail brokerage, and high net worth servicing, asset servicing, particularly in foreign exchange, and also technology solutions. So the group's key investment to date in Monochrome is the Monochrome Asset Management business, which is the investment management arm, and is also the investment manager behind the Monochrome Bitcoin ETF that we're talking about today. The Monochrome Bitcoin ETF, IBTC, is Australia's first spot Bitcoin ETF to hold Bitcoin directly under ASIC's crypto asset licensing framework that was introduced in 2021. IBTC was quoted on CBOE on the 4th of June, which Bridget will go into detail later. And CBOE is the Australian arm of the global listing exchange, Chicago Boards of Options Exchange, CBOE. And I really want to give credit for them for that. CBOE is an experienced listing venue for crypto asset products globally and in Australia. Three out of the 5 crypto asset ETFs in Australia are quoted on CBOE. And what's also interesting that one of the Bitcoin ETFs on the ASX feeds into an existing US Bitcoin ETF, also listed on CBOE US. In Australia, Cboe has a volume market share of over 40% and climbing of ETF trade. They are the real MVPs here. We are also proud to announce that we're chosen Cboe Australia as the listing venue for our upcoming Monochrome Ethereum ETF under the ticker IETH. Moving on is Coins Australia. So set to launch later this year, Coins is an upcoming digital currency brokerage that we've invested in as well. The brokerage is backed by Coins Digital Markets and Monochrome Corporation. Coins operates a prominent crypto asset exchange founded in 2013 and currently serves 18 million customers across Southeast Asia. And lastly, Chrome FX. So the group also has an interest in Chrome FX, which is a foreign exchange servicing company. This arm provides foreign exchange and risk solutions to crypto-oriented companies in Australia. In short, Monochrome is committed to Australia's regulated crypto asset industry, and we believe that institutional investment into crypto assets will be driven by education, engagement, and enabling fiduciaries across compliant access pathways and regulated asset servicing capabilities. So one thing to take away from this is that Monochrome is a true Bitcoin native ETF specialist in Australia. Now, let's discuss what is Bitcoin and why is it important. Bitcoin is a decentralized settlement network backed by physical energy infrastructure through a process called Bitcoin mining. It operates on a transparent ledger distributed across a global network of peers who runs a Bitcoin software. These peers store the entire settlement history and relay transaction group in what we call blocks. Bitcoin is often compared to traditional asset classes like gold, maybe real estate, equities, tech stocks, but is it really? Because I argue that from an ownership perspective, Bitcoin's governance, unlike these other assets, it is truly neutral. Bitcoin does not depend on, nor can be influenced by any human agencies or courts to determine or revoke ownership of the asset on a protocol level. This makes Bitcoin one of the most critical social infrastructures in human history, as it is true promotion of freedom and inclusivity of asset ownership. One thing interesting from an investment lens is Bitcoin's apolitical nature, along with its immunity to sovereign and political risks, positions Bitcoin as a uniquely diversified asset class. In a time today when geopolitical tensions are at its highest amongst the world's most powerful nations, as asset allocators, sovereign and political risks within traditional assets, be it local or international equities, fixed income, currency, or real estate, is something to be taken more seriously. While it is still in its nascent stage, Bitcoin has already set itself apart from traditional asset classes due to its apolitical nature. And what is interesting from a sovereign and political risk perspective is Bitcoin uniquely sits in its league of its own. In other words, the resilience of the Bitcoin protocol makes it an interesting portfolio diversifier in a time when global conflicts intersects with digital advancements. So coming up is our deeper dive into the Monochrome Bitcoin ETF, a globally unique spot Bitcoin ETF product. And I will now hand over the mic to Bridget Nichols, our Chief Operating Officer, to talk about the key features and strategic advantages of IBTC. Thank you.
Thank you, Jeff. Good morning, everyone. We're so pleased to be with you this morning to talk about IBTC. So I'm going to give an overview on its key features, and I'm also going to talk through 6 key structural advantages that we think that IBTC has in the market. As Jeff mentioned, we launched the ETF on the 4th of June of this year. Prior to that, we had the unlisted fund in operation since March 2023. The ETF is trading well, so we're seeing between 200,000 and 1 million AUD traded each day, which is pleasing. And we're beginning to see a number of different categories of investors come into the ETF. Moving then to I guess, a bit of an overview on the ETF's key features. The objective of the fund is to provide an investment return to investors that tracks the price of Bitcoin in Australian dollars. Quite simple. How do we do that? Well, we buy and hold Bitcoin at a benchmark reference rate. We use the CF benchmark CME Bitcoin reference rate Asia Pacific variant, and we do not use any derivatives, leverage, or short selling in the fund. So it's a pure Bitcoin holding strategy. The Bitcoin is held in secure offline storage by our third-party custodian, Gemini, and the management fee of the ETF is 0.5%, subject to an advisor rebate that Grayson will touch on later. The fund is operating with a very low tracking error, and this chart on the right represents the trajectory of the number of Bitcoin that we held since inception. So as you can see, it's a strong, steady climb. And as at this morning, we're holding approximately 11.5 million Aussie dollars or 123 Bitcoin, which is fantastic. Moving then to a little bit of an overview on performance. The chart on the left shows the very close correlation between the NAV price of IBTC and the price of Bitcoin in Australian dollars. Near perfect exposure to Bitcoin is what we're targeting. And this data on the right shows the performance returns of the fund and compares them to the returns of the fund's benchmark. Overall, it's been a strong year of performance for IBTC, but more important than the performance itself is the very strong correlation between the performance of IBTC and the performance of BRAP, as you can see by these correlated figures. Bitcoin has had a really solid run with the general trend being up, but it's important to note that it is a volatile asset class and past performance is not an indicator of future performance. Moving then to the 6 structural advantages. Firstly, simplicity. IBTC holds Bitcoin directly. What do we mean by that? Well, we hold the coins themselves. We don't have any intervening structures such as ETFs or other funds. That means IBTC can call itself a true spot Bitcoin ETF. We hold a crypto-specific license that allows us to hold the Bitcoin directly. Simplicity really is the ultimate form of sophistication when it comes to financial products. Next structural advantage we have is wisdom. The Monochrome team has deep experience in both managing the operational nuances of trading, moving, and storing Bitcoin, and also in servicing ETFs. Our service providers have specialized global expertise in the digital assets segment. We're really pleased to have assembled a first-rate group of institutional grade service providers with the wisdom to help us scale this ETF. State Street performs the role of cash custodian and fund administrator. CF Benchmark, as I mentioned, provides the BRAT for us. Gemini performs the role of digital assets custodian. Atomic is our unit registry, and Selective provides the INAV service, which is a data point available to our investors and published every second during trading hours should they wish to reference it. Professional services are being provided by Baker McKenzie and Ernst & Young. Next structural advantage I'd like to touch on is transparency. IBTC is powered by CF Benchmarks, which is regulated by the UK Financial Conduct Association. The calculation methodology is public and representative of a very large volume of IBTC trading data globally. Investors get a traceable, verifiable reference price that they can trust. Moving then to accuracy. As I mentioned, IBTC is operating with a very low tracking error. Since inception, our tracking error is at 0.04%. This statistic sets us apart from other BTC funds in the market, and we're really proud of it. It's also really important for our investors. Transacting at the benchmark rate allows IBTC to deliver a precise exposure to Bitcoin for our investors. Next advantage I'd like to talk about is flexibility. IBTC is the only dual access Bitcoin ETF in the Australian market, which means we have an unlisted and a listed entry point. The unlisted entry point is through our registry, Atomic, and the listed entry point is on market via the Cboe exchange. You can also change between the two should you wish to. This allows flexibility for investors on how they would like to transact with us and move their Bitcoin around over time. This mechanism also allows a cash in and cash out and Bitcoin in and Bitcoin out mechanism for our investors, giving flexibility to investors on how they want to transact and move their Bitcoin around. And finally, I'd like to talk about ownership. Our fund is structured so that investors maintain ownership of their Bitcoin interests held in the ETF. Investors have an absolute entitlement to their Bitcoin via our Bear Trust structure. This structure enables the Bitcoin out mechanism that I referenced earlier, giving investors greater control and flexibility with respect to taxation planning and estate planning. With IBTC, it's your Bitcoin. Should you have an interest in transacting in any IBTC, you can find us on all major brokerage platforms. I'll now hand back over to Grayson, who's going to talk about some market insights and trends.
Thanks, Bridget. So now we'll go into a bit of the news, what's going on and what we're seeing. So there's no doubt it's been a huge year for Bitcoin, being kicked off with the launch of the spot Bitcoin ETFs in the United States. Bitcoin's had an insane journey from when it was launched back in 2009 to now, where we've progressed to the point where it's a main discussion on the global stage during the US presidential election. Both sides face Bitcoin discussions as it's emerged into the wider lens as a legitimate asset class. And even in Trump's case, he's just put forward a plan to acquire Bitcoin as a national strategic reserve for all the points that Jeff mentioned earlier, being an apolitical asset uniquely positioned against sovereign risks. In other news, Morgan Stanley has announced that their financial advisors are actually allowed to recommend 2 of the recently launched Bitcoin ETFs in America. What this does is set a precedent for the rest of the world, and similarly in Australia. Ultimately, Bitcoin having its place in the modern investment portfolio has been majorly accelerated by the introduction of these ETFs. More Australia specific, we've actually had the groundwork for a regulated Bitcoin product since 2021 when ASIC introduced Info 225. What this did was set out the regulatory obligations for crypto ETPs. Essentially, to be granted a license, operators would have to adhere to criteria such as RG133 custody standards, robust benchmarking like Bridget touched on earlier, and manager competency and familiarity with the asset class. As many of you know, Monochrome and Vasco are proud holders of this unique license. On the other side of the spectrum, we've got crypto trading platforms. They sit in a unique category as they're not actually regulated by ASIC. Crypto trading platforms do offer a 24/7 trading, but they lack the oversight that ETFs do. A key aspect is that they're not required to hold assets on trust and usually only have a contractual obligation to deliver assets on withdrawals, i.e. if they go bankrupt, the holders are only unsecured creditors. Alas, ASIC has pointed out that regulation is coming for crypto trading platforms, so it'll be interesting to see what kind of situation these exchanges face once that arrives. It's also interesting to see that we're starting to see movements from crypto trading platforms into these more regulated structures like ETFs. So next, we've got a bit of a market recap. What we've got here is the split of brokerages that have been accessing IBTC since launch. Overall, pretty diverse range. You can see it's skewed to a certain few. One thing to note here is also that this doesn't include the off-market or in specie transactions that Bridget was talking about, i.e. Bitcoin in, Bitcoin out. And ultimately, we do have quite a wide range of brokerages that access on market. A little bit of price talk. So what I've got here is a chart of the IBTC price of units versus our Bitcoin benchmark. This goes back to March 10, 2023, when we first launched as just purely an unlisted fund. Earlier this year in May, Bitcoin did celebrate its 4th halving event, which is when the supply, the new issuance of Bitcoin gets scheduled to be cut in half. The Bitcoin halving always plays a significant role in Bitcoin pricing, as once again, it results in the supply of freshly mined Bitcoin being reduced to half. Since then, we've gone up 12% from that price, and we've also gone down 20% from that price. Back then, it was worth around 64K USD, and around now, we've come back to that point. Ultimately, it'll be interesting to keep an eye on this, as we've got this new emergence of institutional pathways increasing into an asset class that is forever decreasing its issuance. Cool. So let's get into our Q&A session. Once again, thank you all for submitting your amazing questions. We had quite a few. They were all really good, and the team and I had a great time selecting which ones to answer. Once again, if your question doesn't get answered, feel free to contact us. We'll have our information at the end of the presentation, and we'll be more than happy to help out then. So first of all, from James, we got this question: can you independently verify the Bitcoin owned by the ETF at any time you choose? So this is a fundamental question that most Bitcoiners will ask in respect to Bitcoin products, and rightly so. In our unique case, and given the ability for people to apply with their Bitcoin directly, there is a privacy concern which comes up. Obviously, Bitcoin is quite transparent, and we haven't actually announced this yet, so you guys are the first to hear it. We are partnering with a company called Hozeki. Now, Hozeki is a third-party proof of reserves verification service. They work with some of the big players, namely Bitwise in the US, and also a Japanese company called Metaplanet. And what they do is act as a third party to verify that the Bitcoin we say we hold, we actually do hold. Now, this will make us the first Aussie Bitcoin ETF to at least have a separated party vetting our reserves, which we think is a perfect middle ground between directly displaying our addresses and our duty to respect our investors' privacy. Second question we got from Azim. So given Monochrome's pioneering role in launching Australia's first spot Bitcoin ETF, what were the key factors that enabled you to successfully navigate the regulatory landscape and bring this innovative product to market? I think I'll give that to Bridget.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks, Azim. That's an interesting question. So I guess the journey to bring the ETF to market was a long one. It took Monochrome 3 years. And I guess the key factors in moving through that process and bringing us to where we are today were around assembling a team within Monochrome of cross-functional expertise. So people that are familiar with the asset class and understood how to get a BTC ETF to market and also understood ETF operations. Big regulatory focus as well. So we've got excellent lawyers and compliance people in our team as well. Partnering with experienced service providers was very important. So particularly across market making and fund administration, we had excellent support in removing some challenges that we had to bring the product to market. Working collaboratively with ASIC was very important. So I think Grayson touched on the licensing process. So a lot of work went into achieving the crypto asset license that Vasco and Monochrome held. Working collaboratively with SIBO to ensure that their ETF requirements were met, particularly around BTC as an underlying asset for an ETF, what that means, and the disclosure regime that's appropriate for investors for this type of product. So I guess overall, it was a lesson in persistence and a lesson in patience. Also, I guess we kept our eye on bringing a product to market that was going to be good for investors, particularly across those 6 structural advantage areas that I mentioned in my talk. I've actually also got a question through from Tanya. Re-IBTC investors own their Bitcoin. Is this a point of difference from US BTC ETFs? Great question. So my understanding is the SEC has not yet approved the Bitcoin in and Bitcoin out functionality that we referenced. So we believe that Monochrome is unique in that respect, and it has many advantages for people wanting to move their Bitcoin around. So thank you, Tanya.
Cool. Thank you, Bridget. And our next question we have is, do you foresee any corporations in Australia buying BTC and holding it as a strategic reserve, much like MicroStrategy and Michael Saylor? I think we'll give this one to Jeff.
Sure. Thanks, Grayson. This is actually a very exciting question, because that's a really pivotal moment in terms of corporate and Wall Street world sort of intersecting within the world of Bitcoin. So a bit of backstory is that somewhere around 3 years ago, MicroStrategy, which is a US listed company that is sitting on a huge cash reserve, a very healthy balance sheet, but seeing limited growth in stock prices and in terms of the future moving forward. So they just did a bold move of allocating some of those lazy reserves into Bitcoin, and the rest is history. I think they've done very well, from not just from a financial standpoint, but also from a reputation standpoint. I think they're close to being included in the S&P 500 based on how much their market cap has risen in the last 3 years, and to become a sort of a leader, an example of how people would pursue strategies or sort of corporate strategies into Bitcoin. So in Australia, I think we have a really thriving, unregulated crypto asset exchange landscape for a long time. It's only recently that we have regulated ETFs coming to the picture. These things would probably take time. We're currently seeing small businesses and SMEs as part of the pools that are buying up the ETFs. In terms of like large or unlisted or listed companies, I would say that probably take at least the next 6 to 12 months before we see movements in that. Just because that that process of holding Bitcoin as a corporation is not as simple as holding Bitcoin in your individual name or your family trust. So I'm very excited to see how that evolves in Australia. Now that ETFs enable that, I think the floodgates is open.
Cool. Thanks, Jeff. So our next question, will the ETF support in-kind withdrawals in native BTC? Very happy to say yes. We are globally unique in that IBTC has the ability to both take Bitcoin directly into the fund from the end investor, as well as the ability to withdraw the Bitcoin into self-custody if you so choose. This was a main point when we were building this product to really make it future-proof down the road. If investors do feel they have the confidence and the ability to manage their own keys, we want to absolutely give them the ability to do that. We've also got a question on here about our custody situation. Can the Bitcoin be held in IBTC ever be hacked, or are they held in cold storage, not connected to the internet? So this is kind of one of the reasons why someone might put Bitcoin into the ETF. We do have our custody solution that, once again, is up to RG133 custody standards. Our custodian is Gemini. They go through SOC 1, SOC 2 auditing to completely go through all their operations and show that their cold storage is up to standards. It's a insane process that's way better than a ledger and a sock drawer type of situation, and it involves multi-signature, geographically diverse keys and a random rotation of staff to sign those keys offline. So a very, very good custody solution there. Next question we've got from Electra. Is an Australian financial services license required for an advisor to recommend investments in Bitcoin ETFs? And what responsibilities do advisors have in differentiating between different types of Bitcoin ETFs available in the market? Might give this one to Jeff.
Thanks, Grayson, and thanks, Electra. That's a very good question. I'll answer it in 2 parts. So the first part is the Australian Financial Services License, the AFSL requirement for advisors to recommend investments in Bitcoin ETFs. Yes, there is a requirement to practice as a financial planner in Australia. You have to be authorized under a license. You have to have the right authorizations to even start your professions in that career. And secondly, it's also required to Bitcoin ETFs in particular are financial products, so they require to be issued under a financial services license for the same reason. So to advise and to issue financial products in Australia, yes, they do need an Australian financial services license. The second part of the question is really the responsibility for advisors to differentiate between the types of Bitcoin ETFs available in the market. Well, the basic question is that do people even know that there are different types of Bitcoin ETFs in the market? The answer in Australia is yes. The US do have about 9-10 Bitcoin ETF. They are all structured the same, similarly, very standardized. In Australia, it's a bit different. The landscape is a bit more dynamic and diverse. We do have different structures, and mainly they're split into Bitcoin ETFs that hold the Bitcoin directly and Bitcoin ETFs that don't hold the Bitcoin directly. It is up to the advisors to exercise the fiduciary duty to assess the pros and cons of a direct holding, indirect holding Bitcoin ETF. I think the more competition, the better. But it's very important for us to help advisors get to the understanding that they need, the confidence that they need to be able to differentiate what's in the best interest of the client to pick when they're choosing between the various Bitcoin ETFs in Australia.
Well said. I've just flicked onto our next slide here, but we do have a bit of time and there's some great questions rolling through. So look, I'm just going to pluck one out right here. We've got Arthur asking, what opportunities exist in the foreseeable future to be able to borrow against Bitcoin? This is quite an exciting one, and I know Jeff loves talking about this, so I'm going to pass this to him.
Thanks, Grayson, and thanks, Arthur. Good to see a question from you. I believe that this is something that I've touched on a little bit on social media, just because people have been asking about this for a long time. We are definitely exploring a product in a separate business arm to allow collateralized borrowing against a Bitcoin ETF. Just put it this way, the structure of IBTC puts it in a very unique position to enable products like that to exist because of the flexibility of Bitcoin in, Bitcoin out. It's not apparent from the beginning, but once you go into the product design, those functions becomes inherently important for products like that to exist. I think globally, IBTC is probably the only one that allows Bitcoin in, Bitcoin out without a change of beneficial ownership from a CGT perspective. That probably is a wholesale product for Bitcoin ETF-backed borrowing. So we'll probably keep the details into a separate webinar that we're probably thinking of hosting. So keep in touch with us, sign up for our newsletter, and we'll keep you posted for that. Thank you.
Cool. And we've also got another question here from Tanya. Can you in-specie Bitcoin held on an unregulated exchange to Monochrome? The answer is yes, we can take Bitcoin from exchanges into our ETF. If you have any questions about this, we do have a form on the website for in-specie specific inquiries. Feel free to get in touch there or give us a call, and we're happy to explain a little further on how that process works. So many good questions here. Marcelo asked, when may we please have some research available to share with our licensees? I'll go into this very shortly. I don't know if the other panelists have any questions that they want to answer, Bridget or Jeff.
I think the answers are pretty good. Questions as well. I think there is a question that I see here from Cameron. It's about the understanding process to launch this product from a regulatory perspective, and how is the Bitcoin held in trust, and what protections are there for me as the owner. I believe Bridget touched a bit of that on the regulatory process of us engaging with the industry and also the regulator to get the first ETF in Australia to be able to hold Bitcoin directly. And that actually is the point of difference here, is that the fund actually has Bitcoin in it. It's not through an interposed structure. And also it being a bare trust means that you have absolute entitlement to the Bitcoin, unlike a unit trust. So if anything happens to the fund, you are always sitting on top in terms of getting your assets back. So this is very important for us when you structure an ETF like that. That ultimately we are building a Bitcoin product. We're not here to build a quasi Bitcoin product or a traditional product that is trying to sort of fit its way into the Bitcoin world. I think this is what the ETF specialist specializing in Bitcoin, Bitcoin native ETF specialist is so important to consider, because like we do have a very different lens on how this will operate. Because like I personally has been in Bitcoin since 2013, seen many cycles, and you know how things goes and how things goes up and down, and that's a perspective that money can't buy. You have to live through that. So it is our passion. This is our bread and butter. And I hope that, you know, that's something that serves your needs, all of your needs at some stage or well. Thank you.
Cool. And just before we move on, great question from Simon here. So we've got the ETF will obviously trade in normal ASX trading hours, but crypto trades 24/7. Is there a way of getting up to minute price of the Bitcoin ETF outside of Aussie trading hours? The simplest answer for this is we have our benchmark provider, CF Benchmark's Bitcoin reference rate. They have a every second benchmark that's done by a similar calculation methodology. That is called the BRTI. That's updated every second. And that's also what our INAV, which is if you go on market and buy IBTC, you'll see our INAV that ticks along every second. That's also what that uses to calculate. So that's another good indicator of the pricing movement outside of trading hours. I do have to say that it's not exactly our pricing of the units, but it is a Bitcoin price that is done by EU benchmarking standards, and it's a very good indicator. So let's move on to additional resources we've got here. So Marcelo did ask a good question. Research available to share with the licensees. So Monochrome is proud to have a comprehensive range of research available to anyone to view for free. So these articles are designed to be timeless. They cover a wide range of topics surrounding Bitcoin. If there's something that we don't have on here and that we haven't covered, you know, we're always happy to have a chat and see where we can add some additional content. So please reach out if there's something you want to know, and we'll try and spin something up for everyone to see. So a couple of weeks ago, we also launched our advisor program. Now, this is a pretty big deal for us. Monochrome is pretty driven in bringing Bitcoin to the advice market and ensuring that advisors have the correct tools to navigate this asset class when talking to clients. So through our advisor program, advisors are able to offer their wholesale clients a fee rebate, which brings the effective management fee down to 0.21%. What this does, it includes a bit of training with the use of our resources that we have online. And we believe that it's a good way of getting advisors up to speed and navigating this asset class. We've also got our Financial Review Crypto and Digital Assets Summit coming up. Monochrome is headlining this, and this is happening on September 23rd, I believe. Yep. And we're excited to see a lot of you guys there, and it should be a good event. Finally, if anyone is interested in reviewing our PDS or target market determination, you can find it at ibtc.au. Or if you want to have a chat, anyone that knows us knows that we love to talk about Bitcoin. We can talk about it for ages, and we also love talking about IBTC. So feel free to give us a call or send an email to info@monochrome, and we'll be more than happy to have a yap about Bitcoin or IBTC. But overall, thank you guys for joining. It's been great. We had some great questions. If your question didn't get asked, please get in contact, and have a great rest of the week. Thank you all.